The air inside the Baghdad Museum is heavy with dust and silence. You stand before a cracked display case, its glass reflecting the low amber light that filters through the tall windows. The power flickers, and for a second, the entire hall falls into shadow. In that moment of stillness, you hear the faint hum of a generator somewhere deep within the building. The scent of oil and old parchment mixes with the sharp tang of metal polish. Your breath fogs the glass, and through it, you see it an unremarkable clay jar, no taller than your hand, sitting alone beneath a small brass label. Your fingers twitch with the urge to touch it. Its surface is rough, uneven, streaked with the red of baked earth and the black of ancient bitumen. You imagine how it must have felt when it was first lifted from the ground, still damp with soil, the sun over Kujut Rabu burning the back of a man's neck. A jar like this should have held grain or oil, yet this one hides a secret. A copper tube curled within, an iron rod sealed tight inside. You cannot explain why your pulse quickens. It is as if something beneath that brittle clay still remembers movement. Behind you, a group of students chatter in Arabic, their laughter bouncing off the marble walls. Their teacher gestures to Assyrian tablets, to statues of kings, but his voice fades when you turn back to the jar. The light shifts again, and in that flicker, the vessel seems to glow, as though something unseen stirs within it. You picture a craftsman 2,000 years before the age of electricity, dipping his hands into clay, shaping this very container. Did he know what he was making? Or did he only follow instructions passed down from someone who once saw lightning trapped in liquid form? A guard walks by, his boots echoing through the corridor. He glances at you, then at the jar, and shrugs. To him, it is just another relic, but to you, it hums with quiet defiance. It should not exist, not here, not then, not 2 millennia before the first light bulb burned in Edison's workshop. You lean closer until your reflection merges with the clay. The hum of the generator fades, and for a heartbeat, the silence feels charged. Something in that jar seems to wait, patient and ancient, as if it remembers the moment it once came alive. And in that instant, you begin to wonder if history has already forgotten how to make lightning from clay. The desert outside Baghdad breathes heat like a living creature. You crouch beside a trench, the smell of sunburned soil thick in the air, while men in linen wraps drag shovels through the sand. A wind from the west stirs the dust into low spirals, coating every face with the same pale grit. In the distance, the low hum of the Tigris River is swallowed by cicadas. The year is the early 1900s, and German archaeologist Wilhelm Koenig wipes sweat from his brow, unaware that the jar he is about to uncover will ignite one of the strangest debates in archaeology. He calls out softly to his team, his accent clipped, his tone precise. A foreman kneels, brushing at a fragment, half buried in clay. The sun strikes the metal tip of the trowel, a brief glint like a spark. Koenig leans in. The shape is unmistakable, a vessel of unusual thickness. As the soil gives way, the workers lift it gently, passing it from hand to hand. It is warm from the earth, damp around the rim, and heavier than expected. Koenig feels the faint vibration of movement inside when he tilts it. Perhaps a trapped pebble, perhaps something else. He notes the find meticulously in his leather-bound journal. The site, Kujut Rabu, lies a few miles southeast of Baghdad, once part of the Parthian world. The ruins show hints of workshops and shrines, places where fire and craft intertwined. The discovery seems ordinary at first, yet Koenig's trained eye catches the strange symmetry of the vessel's mouth. A seal of black bitumen clings to it like ancient tar. He feels it crack slightly under his thumb. Inside gleams the edge of metal, not bronze, not gold, but the dull, reddish tone of aged copper. By late afternoon, the trench fills with heat so dense it seems to hum. Koenig retreats to his tent, sets the jar upon a wooden table, and cleans it under the flicker of a lantern. The smell of oil mixes with the desert air. He removes the last layer of dirt and exposes the interior cylinder, neatly rolled. Inside it, an iron rod sits fixed and perfect. His pulse quickens. He knows enough chemistry to sense design where chance cannot explain. This was not decoration, it was construction, function, purpose. Outside, the wind rises again, howling across the tents like static. Koenig holds the jar to the light, and for an instant, the copper inside seems to shimmer, as if remembering the charge it once carried. He writes one final note in his journal. Something is wrong with history. You sit beside Koenig's work table, where the evening air presses in heavy and warm. The lantern flame wavers as a mosquito circles above it, then vanishes into the dark. The jar rests between notebooks and a chipped porcelain cup, its surface cleaned but still smelling faintly of the soil it came from. Koenig's hands move carefully, each motion slow and deliberate. The clay vessel, now freed from its crust of dust, reveals itself like a puzzle waiting to be solved. It stands barely 5 inches tall, its mouth sealed with bitumen hardened by centuries. Koenig traces the seam of the black tar with a thin bronze tool until it loosens, cracking open like the lid of an egg. The scent that escapes is sharp and metallic, a ghost of copper and ancient oil. He peers inside, and there it is, the heart of the mystery. A rolled sheet of copper, pressed into a cylinder that hugs the interior wall. In its center, an iron rod protrudes slightly, held firm by the bitumen seal. Between the two metals lies a narrow hollow, just wide enough to hold liquid. He sketches the structure in his journal, his pencil scratching over paper in quick, certain strokes. Every measurement is noted, every angle compared. He wonders if this is the work of a craftsman or a scholar, if it was meant to contain or to create. The materials whisper their story. Copper, the conductor of heat and energy. Iron, strong yet easily corroded. Bitumen, an insulator that resists moisture. Together they form not an ornament but a system, a deliberate assembly. Outside, night falls over the desert, stars flickering like sparks against black glass. Koenig leans back in his chair and rubs his temple. He has seen vessels for oil, for wine, for ritual offerings, but none built with such precision. No pattern of worship requires 2 metals separated by pitch. The design makes sense only in the language of reaction, of chemistry, of power. He fills a basin with vinegar from the field rations and dips a fragment of copper into it. The metal tingles against his fingers, faintly alive. He looks again at the jar and feels a quiet conviction rise in his chest. Perhaps this was never meant to hold anything at all. Perhaps it was meant to make something. The lantern sputters, light trembling on the copper's surface. Koenig sets his notes aside and stares at the vessel, as if waiting for it to move. The night outside remains silent, but within the jar, history begins to hum. The morning light cuts through the canvas of Koenig's tent, pale and sharp. You wake to the sound of papers fluttering and the steady scrape of metal on wood. Koenig is already at his desk, his shirt sleeves rolled, his hair still damp from washing. Before him sits the jar, now freed of its last fragments of dirt and a scattering of copper and iron samples. He moves with quiet precision, as though the act of arranging these materials might summon understanding. He dips a brush into vinegar and lets the liquid slide along the copper's surface. The smell is sour, clean, and bright against the heaviness of the desert air. Then he lowers the iron rod, allowing it to touch the inner wall. For a moment, nothing happens, but when he connects the two with a wire from his instrument chest, the needle of his galvanometer trembles. Koenig blinks, uncertain. He leans closer. The needle flicks again, a single pulse. He exhales, long and slow. His notebook fills with restless handwriting. He writes in German first, then translates roughly into English. Copper, iron, acid, current, measurable. Function evident though purpose unknown. The words feel fragile, as though too bold for their own time. In the early years of the 20th century, Archaeology seeks proof of craftsmanship, not of science. Yet here, in the ruins of Kujut Rabu, Koenig has found a whisper of both. He repeats the test: vinegar, lemon juice, grape wine. Each time, the same result: a faint, undeniable spark. It is small, but it exists. 2,000 years before Edison's bulb, electricity hums between copper and iron buried beneath Mesopotamian soil. Koenig laughs softly, the sound somewhere between wonder and disbelief. He pours the liquid out and listens to the echoing drip inside the empty jar. The day grows hotter. His team calls from outside, but he cannot yet leave. He stares at the vessel and sees more than clay. He sees an idea out of place in history. If one jar can hold a charge, could many have powered something greater? Lamps, ritual tools, healing instruments? The possibilities bloom faster than reason can contain them. Koenig closes his notebook, sets his pen aside, and touches the jar one final time. The copper feels warm beneath his fingertips, as if remembering its purpose. He knows the world will doubt him. Yet he also knows that once an idea sparks, it cannot be buried again. In that silent tent, amid sand and sun, a single thought begins to glow. What if electricity is older than we are willing to believe? You picture Koenig's discovery rippling outward, crossing decades like current through copper. Years pass, and the jar travels from the dusty tents of Kujut Rabu to the marble halls of the Baghdad Museum. It sits beneath steady lights, labelled, catalogued, and mostly ignored. Scholars walk by it in silence, yet word spreads through the small circles of scientists who dare to blur the lines between archaeology and physics. By the middle of the 20th century, the mystery begins to stir again. Engineers, historians, and the merely curious try to recreate Koenig's experiment. They roll sheets of copper, insert iron rods, seal the tops with bitumen, and fill the vessels with vinegar, wine, or lemon juice. When the circuits connect, the air fills with anticipation. The result is modest, but unmistakable. A pulse, a spark, a measurable current of 1 volt. Small enough to slip past notice, yet powerful enough to ignite imagination. In a laboratory in London, a scientist leans close to his replica, watching the needle twitch. "It works," he whispers. Across the ocean, in classrooms from Paris to Tokyo, teachers use the same demonstration to show that electricity may have been discovered long before any textbook claims. A few of them connect multiple jars in sequence, creating a chain of energy strong enough to illuminate a small bulb for a brief, trembling second. The light flickers and dies, but the audience gasps. The ancient world, for an instant, seems alive again. Writers and filmmakers soon take notice. The Baghdad Battery appears in documentaries and journals, always shrouded in equal parts science and myth. Some call it proof of forgotten technology. Others dismiss it as coincidence. Yet the more it is tested, the more the pattern holds. 2 metals, 1 acidic liquid, a spark. It defies time, as though time were just another conductor. In Baghdad, Koenig's notes fade in old archives, his ink browned by years of dust, but his discovery outlives him. Each generation revisits the same question: what could our ancestors have done with this power? Were they plating gold onto temple ornaments, healing through current, or simply experimenting without knowing the word for electricity? You imagine the jar glowing faintly in a dark workshop, light reflecting off the eyes of the craftsman who built it. For that single heartbeat in history, knowledge might have flared and vanished, leaving only clay behind. The spark still travels, unseen, through the corridors of centuries, waiting for someone to catch it again. You stand in a crowded lecture hall somewhere in Europe during the middle of the 20th century. The air smells of chalk and varnish. A professor gestures toward a replica of the Baghdad Battery resting on a wooden table beside glass beakers and copper wires. Students lean forward as he pours a thin stream of vinegar into the vessel. The metal rod shivers slightly. A moment later, a voltmeter needle trembles. A murmur runs through the room. It is one thing to hear of an ancient jar that could make electricity. It is another to see it happen with your own eyes. When the test ends, questions rise like sparks. If it works, what was it for? Theories bloom, each stranger than the last. Some claim that Parthian artisans discovered how to coat objects with precious metal using a crude form of electroplating. They imagine workshops where jewelers dipped copper ornaments into chemical baths while tiny currents sealed gold onto their surfaces. Others picture priests wielding the jars in temples, using shocks to inspire fear or awe, proof that the gods themselves could send invisible power through a chosen vessel. A few scholars reject both ideas. They see instead a ritual object, symbolic rather than functional. To them, the copper and iron are metaphors, not machines, a union of opposing elements meant to signify harmony or divine balance. The battery, they say, is coincidence wearing the disguise of purpose. But outside academia, curiosity refuses to fade. In workshops and basements, experimenters recreate the jar with modern tools, pushing its limits. They test how long the charge lasts, what it can power, and how ancient materials compare to contemporary ones. Some claim that a single jar can electroplate thin layers of metal. Others find the current too weak to do more than tingle the skin. The debate grows into something larger than archaeology. It becomes a mirror, reflecting how humans interpret mystery. Some see proof of forgotten brilliance. Others see the danger of exaggeration. The truth sits somewhere in between, quiet, elusive, and enduring. You imagine that original craftsman again, shaping clay under the desert Sunday. He likely never used the word electricity. Yet he knew how to make something happen when metal touched metal and liquid filled the space between. Theories multiply, but evidence remains thin. For every answer, new questions rise. Perhaps the real secret of the Baghdad Battery is not what it did, but how it keeps the world arguing still. You find yourself inside a modern museum laboratory, where glass walls reflect the white glare of fluorescent lights. The Baghdad Battery stands reconstructed on a steel counter beside precision instruments, its replica built from the same humble ingredients: clay, copper, iron, and pitch-black bitumen. A curator in gloves adjusts the wires connected to its sides, while a small crowd of visitors watches in hushed anticipation. A switch clicks, and the voltmeter needle jumps. 1 volt, steady and undeniable. A young student exhales in wonder. "It really works," she whispers, but her instructor smiles with cautious restraint. "The current is weak," he explains, "barely enough to feel on the skin. To turn theory into proof, one must understand purpose, not just possibility." Still, the charge feels like a bridge between ages, a single spark that leaps across 2,000 years. Television crews have come and gone. In science shows and educational programs, the jar has been tested, debated, and reimagined. The Mythbusters of the early 21st century built several replicas, filling them with vinegar and grape juice. They found that when multiple jars were connected in sequence, the combined current could indeed electroplate a small object in a faint film of silver. The result was not dazzling, but it was real. The ancient design, even if by accident, could produce electricity. Yet skepticism remains its constant companion. Mainstream archaeologists remind the world that intention matters as much as outcome. A clay jar that produces voltage is not necessarily a battery. It might have been a vessel for sacred scrolls, its metals added for structure or symbolism. No texts from the Parthian or Sasanian eras mention the storage or use of electric energy. No tools or lamps have been found to accompany the jars. Without context, they argue, there is only curiosity pretending to be science. Still, curiosity is stubborn. New generations of students return to the experiment, each time hoping the needle will move just a little higher, or the light will glow a little longer. The jar becomes less an artifact, and more a metaphor for the hunger to rediscover what was once known. In the quiet after the tests, the curator removes his gloves and leans close to the replica. The faint metallic scent lingers in the air, sharp as memory. Even now, the question refuses to fade. Were the ancients closer to modern power than we ever imagined, or are we simply desperate to see ourselves reflected in their inventions? You walk through the museum after hours, the halls dim, your footsteps echoing between stone columns. The Baghdad Battery replica still sits beneath its glass dome, a single spotlight illuminating its clay surface. Around it, other relics whisper of empires long turned to dust cuneiform tablets, obsidian blades, fragments of scrolls turned the color of smoke. Every artifact in this room carries a question, but this one hums with something different, something alive. As you stare at it, you begin to realize that the story of this jar is not only about electricity, it is about curiosity itself, the force that has carried humanity from flint and fire to light and circuit. Before the Parthians, Greek philosophers in the 6th century before the Common Era rubbed amber with wool and watched it attract dust, naming the strange effect electron. Centuries later, alchemists in the Islamic Golden Age spoke of hidden energies in metals, unaware that their experiments would someday give birth to chemistry and physics. The Baghdad Battery fits somewhere between those moments, suspended in the grey space where invention and intuition meet. Perhaps it was the work of a thinker who did not have the words for voltage or current, someone who simply noticed that certain combinations of metal and liquid reacted with heat and spark. Or perhaps it was a ritual artifact mistaken by time for science. Whatever its origin, it reflects a truth that threads through every century. Knowledge is rarely invented once. It is rediscovered, renamed, and rebuilt again and again. You imagine a scene in another age, a craftsman in a narrow workshop beside the Tigris, mixing resin and copper while the evening call to prayer rises from the city walls. He seals the vessel carefully, sets it aside, and smiles at the faint vibration beneath his hands. He does not call it power, he calls it life. Centuries pass. The empires that ruled these lands crumble into memory. The jar sinks beneath sand, sleeps through conquest and empire, until a foreign hand lifts it back into the light. And still, it works. The spark outlived the civilization that made it. In that realization, the Baghdad Battery becomes more than artifact. It becomes proof that progress is not a straight line, but a circle one that always leads us back to the same question. What else have we already discovered, only to forget? The city of Baghdad sleeps under a sky streaked with smoke and silence. You walk through its streets in memory, hearing the echo of what was once laughter, commerce, and prayer. In the early years of the 21st century, the museum that guarded Mesopotamia's past becomes a battlefield. Glass shatters, alarms fail, the air fills with dust and the dull thunder of boots. In the chaos, the history of civilization is looted one artifact at a time. Inside the museum, lights flicker against broken walls. A guard hides behind an overturned display, clutching a flashlight whose beam cuts through the drifting haze. Cases lie open, scrolls torn, statues toppled. The Baghdad Battery, that small jar of clay and copper, disappears into the noise. No one notices the moment it vanishes. No one hears the sound it makes when lifted from its stand. Some say it was taken by looters and sold to the black market. Others believe it was destroyed in the fire that swept through the archives. The truth remains untraceable. Days later, when the building is secured, the curators walk through what remains. They find shattered pedestals, scattered labels, and footprints in the ash. One of them kneels at the empty space where the jar once stood, a faint outline left on the marble by centuries of dust. The silence presses down like grief. It feels as though a part of humanity's memory has been erased, not by time, but by neglect. Outside, television cameras record the damage. Viewers around the world watch the images of ruin and weep for what can never be replaced. The missing artifacts are listed, catalogued, mourned. The Baghdad Battery is among them, lost, like the spark it once held. Yet somewhere in the city, perhaps hidden in a private collection or buried again in earth, The jar may still exist. The thought lingers like static in the air. The story refuses to end. Because even when the object is gone, its mystery remains, carried in the minds of those who remember that electricity once slept in clay. You picture the museum restored years later, its floors polished and its exhibits returned. Visitors pass by a photograph of the missing artifact, unaware that the real thing may still hum beneath the sand. In that absence, the jar becomes more powerful than ever, a reminder that knowledge, once lost, glows brightest in the dark. You sit beneath the hum of a single light bulb. The filament glows with the steady warmth of modern certainty. Every city on Earth now hums with invisible current, pulsing through cables, powering machines, voices, and dreams. Electricity has become so ordinary that we forget its wonder. Yet somewhere in the back of your mind, that small jar from ancient Baghdad still waits, silent and impossible. The world credits Thomas Edison with harnessing light in the late 19th century, but the spark that lives in the Baghdad Battery predates his invention by nearly 2 millennia. The comparison is not meant to rewrite history, only to remind us how fragile the chain of knowledge can be. When Koenig first tested the jar, he felt the same jolt of discovery that Edison must have felt centuries later, the moment when darkness gives way to proof that light can be made, not borrowed from fire. Imagine the two of them across time. Edison, in his workshop in Menlo Park, wires coiling like vines around his desk. Koenig, in his tent outside Baghdad, desert wind rattling the lantern at his side. Both men staring at the same phenomenon through different ages, a shimmer, a pulse, a secret drawn from metal and liquid, both touching the edge of what it means to command nature itself. In truth, the Baghdad Battery may never have powered a lamp or charged a tool, yet its design whispers something profound about human instinct. We are drawn to the unknown, compelled to experiment, to push, to create, even without the language to explain why. A spark is not just energy, it is desire made visible. You glance again at the light above you. It hums quietly, almost musically, and for a heartbeat you imagine that it hums in the same note as that ancient jar. The gap between centuries collapses. The Parthian craftsman, the German archaeologist, the American inventor, all bound by the same current that moves through the wire, through the mind, through history. Somewhere, deep in the soil of Iraq, the lost artifact may still rest. Its copper heart may have dulled, its iron spine corroded, yet within it remains the memory of light. 2,000 years before Edison, someone shaped a vessel that could hold a spark. And the truth is, we are still learning how to keep it alive. The museum is quiet again. You return to the display long after closing hours, the echo of your footsteps dissolving into the marble. The halls smell faintly of dust and time, and the air feels cool against your skin. Where the original Baghdad Battery once stood, there is only a photograph now, a small frame of glass that catches the reflection of the overhead light. It looks ordinary, almost disappointing, until you remember what it once represented. Civilizations rise and fall, yet curiosity never dies. It waits, buried beneath centuries, until someone uncovers it and breathes it back into flame. The jar of clay may have cracked, the copper may have turned green with age, but the thought behind it, the urge to understand the invisible, still moves through us. Every discovery hums with the same note. Every experiment whispers the same promise, that somewhere within the quiet of matter, something is waiting to come alive. Perhaps that is why we build museums, why we tell stories of things that no longer exist. We are trying to hold the current that runs through time, to keep it from fading. The Baghdad Battery, whether it was an accident or a masterpiece, reminds us that light was never truly invented. It was remembered. Outside, the city of Baghdad glows with electric lamps that mirror the stars above. The current that flows through its streets is older than it knows, a descendant of that single spark sealed in clay. The power hums on, indifferent to empires, untouched by war. You stand before the empty pedestal, and close your eyes. The silence vibrates softly, like a chord still resonating after the music has stopped. Somewhere in that stillness, you can almost hear it, a faint, persistent hum. The light never went out. It simply changed hands.